Welcome back to Session 6 of the Discipleship Training School. The Discipleship Training School is an 8-part free course designed to challenge and equip Christians to join God in His mission to make disciples of all nations. Today we're beginning the first of 2 parts on the how-to of making disciples. Now, as we say, this is Session 6. There have been 5 sessions before this, and it's very useful background information that we're building on today. So if you haven't, I would suggest going back and taking a look at those. In our first session, we looked at defining our terms. What is a disciple? What does it mean to make disciples? In our second session, we looked at why we should make disciples and what are some of the reasons why we don't. In the third session, we looked at essential heart values and convictions for effective disciple makers. In our fourth session, we looked at healthy habits, good routines to get into that will lead us towards a disciple-making habit within our life. And in our last session, we looked at Jesus, looked at the way He related to His disciples, He being the model and some of the principles that we learned from the way in which He engaged with His disciples. All of the materials are available for free from our website from www.eastgatebiblechurch.com. Now, if you're impatient like me, you may have started here because you think, I haven't got much time. There's 2 sessions on telling me how to make disciples. This is all I want. I'd encourage you to at least, if you're really stuck for time, to at least go back and look at Session 3 where we looked at heart values. Because I think we made a pretty compelling case that if we don't actually love and have convictions that lead us towards disciple making, we are not going to do anything. So I'd suggest if you're strapped for time, at least look at Session 3 and maybe Session 4, but very much Session 3 in order for this time together to be productive and effective for you as well. So today we're going to look at 4 key principles in making disciples. I say principles rather than methods because depending on your context, you might not do things exactly like this. So I don't want to command and say, prescribe, this is how you must do things, but just principles and ideas as a framework to how to adjust to your context. So the 4 things we're looking at today are identifying your mission field, engaging with people, building relationships, and bringing Jesus and the gospel into those relationships. But before we begin, I want you to pause and discuss in your group the question on your screen about why does it seem to take longer for people to come to faith in the culture in which we live today? Now, if you're like me, that question might not actually sit particularly well with you. The idea that somehow it might take longer today for people to come to faith than it has in the past. Am I suggesting that God is not got as good a success rate? He's not as effective as He once used to be? I'm certainly not saying that. And certainly even still today, we still have people who through very brief encounters come to faith like on the first time in which they meet someone and someone explains the gospel. That does still happen. But there's been some significant changes in Western culture which have made it more difficult and people less connected to the Christian faith and having a less familiarity with Christian concepts, that most missiologists and evangelists say that it tends to take a longer period of time to bring somebody from unbelief to faith in Jesus Christ. Say, for example, it wasn't that long ago that within our culture that the majority of people either went to church or they at least knew someone who went to church, and on the whole, churches were esteemed in community as being a good and valuable thing as part of the society in which we live in. But that's not quite the way we see things in our culture here in Australia and a lot of other Western cultures around the world. Not only are less and less people involved in a church or have any connection with the church, but there's also an increasing idea that the church has become irrelevant. There's even, rather than seeing it as a valued part of a society in which we live, there is actually some strong opposition against the presence of the church within the society in which we live. So the old days of running an event and people come flocking along to it, or just presuming that by inviting a friend to church that they will naturally come along, is actually not so simple as it once used to be. Matter of fact, some of the people, as you've been praying, ask for God to lead people on your heart for you to engage with them, a lot of those people probably have absolutely zero desire to enter into a church building. But they know you, and they are more than willing to enter into your home, to be part of your life. It's often been said that authenticity is the apologetic of our age, meaning that apologetics is often a term used for the defense of the faith, where in the past it's been people engaging with different facts and arguments as to why we should come to faith in Jesus Christ. But in our postmodern society, where people are so, truth is kind of so relative, without the exception of the occasions when someone has just got a real stumbling block where they want to come to faith, but there's one issue that's keeping them from, where you may need to engage in apologetics in that method. When I say that our authenticity is the new apologetic, people want to see genuineness. They want to see people who are genuine about the faith in which they have, that is expressed in a genuine love for people, and that actually has some real relevance in their life that can be tangibly be seen. Now, I want to say that while I'm putting a strong emphasis on the nature of relationship and time and community for bringing people to make disciples, I need to say that I'm not writing off things like street evangelism or going out handing tracts. What I'm talking about in terms of discipleship, in terms of what Jesus spoke about, where there's the ongoing teaching and relationship, then that may not be as forefront in those sort of short exchanges that you might have in street evangelism and tracting. But the gospel still is the power of God, and I'm certainly not saying avoid using those things. Those things are still valuable in the sense that it's the gospel going out, and also through those methods you may be engaging with people that you might otherwise have absolutely no connection with whatsoever. So I'm not saying that this is the one and only means to engage with people, to bring them into a relationship with Jesus Christ. But this leads us to our first thing we're going to look at today, and that is identifying your mission field. Now, throughout this course, I've encouraged and challenged people to pray for God to lead you to either to a people or to a group of people that God might be calling you to invest something of your life in order to help them to learn about Christ and hopefully to commit to Him to become more like Christ. Now, at this point in time, you may have some specific people, or maybe a specific person. Quite often it will be more than one person as you kind of narrow down and kind of engage and figure out who actually has a deep spiritual desire to know something more about the things of God. But what I would say is, in your quest to identify a mission field, I would say look naturally in the places where you already are. Now, we live very, very busy lives. People aren't looking for something else to do. We are already placed in places where we live, where we work, that we're interacting with the same groups of people in social activities, in hobbies, in sports. And I'd say look inside the circles where you already are. Not just because we're busy and that's more convenient. I mean, after all, we're told that the harvest is plentiful and the workers are few, so there's no such thing as a wrong place to bring the mission of God to. But I think there's also something more significant about the places where we live and work. Have a look with me with Acts chapter 17, verses 24 to 27. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he has made from one man every nation of mankind to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward Him and find Him. See what's being said there? That God has numbered our days and even allotted the boundaries of where we live for the purpose that people might seek out and find God. So wherever you live, God has placed you there for the purpose of engaging people. Same, the places in which we work. And it is this Bible passage which has encouraged me to engage with the community around my neighbourhood where I live. Now, we've lived in this house for 2 years. I know the people on the direct borders of our house, but not the rest of the neighbourhood so much. And we're going to talk about how God took that conviction and led to action a little bit later on. But because this isn't about giving you prescribed methods to do, God may lay on your heart a mission field that's not your local neighbourhood. It might be your workplace, it might be a sporting group, it might be a hobby. I've heard of mums who regularly go to play at a particular park week after week with their kids, and through that process engage with a similar group of parents who are taking their kids there, and they say, well, that's my mission field, that was God has entrusted with me. Or people who regularly walk their dog and take them a similar place, bumping into the same people. Say, this is the mission field that God has entrusted to me. There's no right or wrong mission field, because the good news of the gospel is needed by every single human being who's born and descended from Adam, which is every single person. But while I've been encouraging us throughout this series to pray for God and his leading, I certainly am not saying do nothing if you don't feel a strong sense of God's leading towards a particular group. Because as I've said, I don't believe there's such thing as a wrong mission field, because the harvest is plentiful, the workers are few, the gospel is the good news wherever we go, whatever group of people we might take it to. But also we need to contemplate the fact that God might lead us to a mission field where we are not presently having any engagement whatsoever. Just like a missionary might have a real strong sense on their heart that they want to engage with a particular country where they don't know anyone, where they've never been before, but God is calling them to that country. Likewise, God might be calling you to a particular people group or a particular community in your local area where you don't have an existing engagement or existing involvement in it. And you don't need to have an existing connection or existing experience in that area. To give an example, within the town in which we live here in Toowoomba, there's Rahab Ministries, which engage and bring the gospel to the sex industry workers. Now, I can tell you, to be a part of that Rahab group, you don't have to have a background experience in the sex industry, and it's probably sometimes, particularly if you are a Christian, that you are not actively involved in the sex industry. So you need to consider that God may call you to something where you're not presently connected in any sense whatsoever. And while we're on that topic, I want you to discuss the 3 questions on your screen. What you would do if God was placing a conviction on your heart to spend a time with a people group or a community whose values and actions might be either controversial or contradict the values of the Christian faith. Now, it's all well and good to identify your mission field, but there's no good just saying, these are the people who are my mission field, and doing nothing. To identify a mission field means that our next step is to think, how can I engage? How can I connect with the people in that community? How can I get to know them? Now, some people who are like me, who are introverted, the thing you most naturally want to do is to stay home. You don't want to make connection with new people. You feel like you've got enough people in your life. But what we need to recall is Jesus not only sends us out on his mission, but he promises his presence and his enabling with us. Our mission which he sends us upon is not dependent upon our skills, not dependent upon our personality, but dependent upon the trusting and enabling of God's Holy Spirit within us. You never walk alone in discipleship. We need to remember that. Now, when I told you before, I had a strong conviction I needed to engage the neighbourhood in which I lived. Now, naturally, I'm introverted. The last thing I want to do is go introduce myself to people that I don't know. But somehow my initial enthusiasm, my thought was this. It was just getting close to December, getting close to Christmas, and I thought, I'm going to be a door-to-door advent calendar. I thought every single day I'm going to take a little gift around to people in my neighbourhood from this street to this street, every single day from December 1st to December 24th, maybe 25th. And then I thought, Steve, I love your enthusiasm. I love your desire to connect and be a blessing to your neighbourhood. But I think every single day is not going to be a blessing. It's going to be annoying. So eventually I tamed that down, and together my wife would bake different Christmassy goods every week. And every Saturday in December, there were 4 Saturdays leading up to Christmas, I'd go to the 14 houses in my local neighbourhood, get to know them, offer them these gifts that we'd baked. And I was really encouraged with that process. Like even in that very first week, I'm meeting people who don't know me from a bar of soap, and I had 2 households that openly invited me into their homes, sat down, had good chats, had coffees together. Now isn't that great? There's still people in your communities who actually want to have a relationship with people, who actually like a sense of community and to talk with other people. There were some of the households I went to who said, I miss those days when neighbourhoods and communities would do things together and would work together. And I was encouraged by that. Even though, if I'm being honest, every single Saturday morning, I would wake up thinking, this is a waste of time. I don't feel like doing this because I'm an introvert. I don't naturally feel inclined to do these things. But every time, as I went out and I engaged with these people, I'd come back and it's like, I'm so glad I did that. God, I'm trusting that you have laid this on my heart. I'm trusting you, even though I consider myself an introvert, that you can help build relationships with these people in these neighbourhoods. And when I engaged 14 different houses, it wasn't because I expected 14 households to have ongoing close relationships. I'm sure there's some who were interested, and there were. But there'll be some who thought it was a nice gesture, thank you very much, but don't start doing this every week or you'll be annoying. But I reckon there would be at least 5 to 6 households that we would certainly be most welcome and wanting to invite those people into our homes to share meals together. And as we invite them in to share meals, over those dinner tables, conversations have people start to share about their lives. I mean, God only knows of those families that we begin to get involved with who will be open to the work and the ministry of the gospel. But God has placed on us a love and a heart for these people, not because they are in a project to receive a particular outcome, to bring them to the Christian faith. That's what we would desire for them, but we're not distancing ourselves from them if that never eventuates. Our love is for them because they are in our neighbourhood, they're created in the image of God, and we want to genuinely get to know them. And I'd appreciate your prayers for me as I continue to engage our local neighbourhood to that effect. But the bottom line is, despite my fears, despite my lack of natural ability to make connections in a social sense, God has begun to make those connections, and I pray that God would continue to build and develop those to bring people to be His very children. But I can tell you now, if I lived according to the way in which I felt, I would never, ever be in the action of making disciples. It was going to require me to be covered deeply in prayer, come before God in prayer, trusting in His enabling and going out in obedience despite my own personality, despite my own views of my own abilities to do things, to trust that Jesus has sent us and Jesus has promised His presence with us. So I want you to start discussing your groups. If you are reluctant to engage a people in disciple making, note down the reasons why and raise it in your prayer groups at the end of the session so that you and your prayer partner can pray for this issue. Now, often the hardest thing is that first step of making a connection with someone. But what I want to encourage you is the same God who is with you and helped you to engage a particular people is also with you and in working within you to help you to build and to grow those relationships. Christians by nature, we are a missional people. Now, sometimes in Christian circles, that word missional can be controversial because some people hear that and think missional people are just people who drink coffee or drink craft beers together and talk about nothing significant. But what I want us to do is when I think of the word missional, I want you to think missionary-like. I want you to think about what do missionaries do as they're preparing to engage a people when they go and travel to another part of the world. No, they immerse themselves in the culture. They learn about the people whom they're hoping to reach. They learn the language. They learn the routines. They learn what is the right and wrong ways to communicate. They live amongst the people and they desire to be a blessing amongst the people. They do all of these things so that they can effectively reach the people of the culture whom they're trying to engage with. Because they understand if they just turned up without understanding the people to whom they came to, without building those relationships, their ministry may not be as effective and fruitful as it could be. Once again, I need to say, yes, I do believe the gospel is the power of God for salvation, and God can still use things and turn someone from the kingdom of darkness into the kingdom of the beloved Son, just like that. But more often than not, our missionary endeavours come through building relationships over time. Now, if I'm honest, there's probably part of me that would be more inclined towards that idea of just bringing in the gospel straight away. If they don't respond, moving on to another and keep going so until somebody is responsive. Because as someone who's introverted, and also because it takes a whole less time, it's a whole lot easier than it is to invest and pour out your life into somebody, to invite them into your home. These things take time. These things take effort. These things take sacrifice. Sometimes the people will disappoint you. But the same people that God has laid upon your heart, God can work through you to build those relationships. Remember, the people who Jesus chose to build his church, those 12 guys, he spent 3 years living with them, teaching them, showing them, giving them experiential chance to practice and do the things that Jesus was calling them to do. And I've got no doubt throughout that time he had major frustrations. He was majorly disappointed with some of their failures. But our lives aren't the same as Jesus. We don't want to make a direct thing, this is what Jesus did, we must do the same. His context and his culture was very different to ours. We're not traveling around having thousands follow us to listen to our teaching, and we've got a little group of 12 that we've said, come follow me on the side. But in our modern lives, in the context in which you live, I want you to pause and discuss what are some activities, what would it look like to help build relationships with the people you are trying to connect with. I certainly don't claim to be the fount of all wisdom, but these are just some ideas that I thought of as in preparing for this course. We've mentioned in session 4, hospitality. There's nothing that makes a people feel more welcome than to invite you into your own home and have a home-cooked meal. Like over those tables, conversations happen where people open up and share of their lives. Take time to celebrate with people. Celebrate their birthdays, their anniversaries, their important things to those people. Look for ways to bless those people. Whether you see a practical need that comes up, how you could be involved in helping with that, and encouraging and supporting them in the things of their life. Doing things together. You might find you've got some shared interests. There's nothing that builds and strengthens a relationship like finding things you have in common and doing those things together. Being with them during hard times. To bear with them, to show your love toward them, not just when things are easy and smooth sailing, but even when they're hard. To be there to comfort them, to encourage them, and also, I would say, and to pray for them. Pray for them during their hard times. All of these things are relationship building, but they're not just foundations for the beginning. These are ongoing things to continue in our relationship building. But making disciples of Jesus Christ can't be done without introducing people to Jesus. How do we talk about Jesus? How do we talk about the gospel into those relationships? That's what we want to look at now. Now, this is the question that makes our knees knock. How do we turn a conversation? How do we even raise Jesus with people who are not used to talking about him in any sense whatsoever? How do you go from the everyday talking about the weather, talking about your jobs, to talking about deep spiritual matters? As you build relationships and you're inviting people into your lives, having meals around the table, people tend to open up. They tend to talk about the things that are going on in their lives. And I'd encourage us to prayerfully ask God, help me to be a good listener, to hear the concerns people have, to even hear and see the things that they may not be directly expressing, but the thoughts and fears and hurts they have behind the scenes. Because there's a lot of hurt and suffering in the world in which we live in. There's a lot of hurt and suffering in the people in which we engage with, that we might be able to see these things. And if you believe that we have a God who is worth trusting with our life, actually offer to pray for them during these things. Now, we often get really scared and think, why would I pray? That might freak them out. It's as simple as saying that I believe that God hears our prayers and I believe that prayer is powerful. Would you mind if I prayed for you about this? And you'd be surprised how many people not only say yes, but actually appreciate it. Now, whether or not they actually believe there's something behind that or not, but at least they see in that process your care for them and the fact that you believe that there is a God who exists who is worth trusting. So if you're depending upon God as a normal thing in prayer for your own life, why wouldn't you extend that to others? But your desire to pray for them should always come out of a love for them, out of a deep concern for them. Not for some sake of trying to put on a show or trying to reach an agenda. But at the same time, as you offer to pray for someone, it may give you a bit of an insight into their responsiveness to spiritual things. It might help you understand or they want to talk or engage about these type of things. But I don't mean force an occasion to pray for them just so that you can gauge their responsiveness. It's not as though you need to be having a conversation and someone says, oh, it's been a really hot summer, my grass is starting to die. Oh, can I pray for you about that? That might seem a little bit weird. But if a natural opportunity arises, to offer to pray for them, not only because you deeply care for them and you want to bring their needs before God and show them there is a God who is worth trusting, but it'll also help you see something of their responsiveness to spiritual things. And nothing encourages your peers more than talking about how God has used you in those situations. So I want you to pause and talk about it. Have you ever offered to pray for someone who doesn't know Jesus, and how did that go? How did they respond? Now, hopefully that was an encouraging time of discussion. However, that really depends on what has happened in the lives of the people who are in your group. If no one in your group has ever thought to ask to pray for someone who doesn't know Jesus, then you probably didn't have much encouragement. You probably didn't have much to say. But I'd say is, as things come up, show your care for praying for them. And not just for that first occasion, as things continue to come up, continue to offer your prayerful support, and not just say that I'll pray for you, but to pray with them there and then. But while this might open the doorway to spiritual conversations, this isn't the gospel in and of itself. How do we get to a point where we talk about Jesus, where we talk about matters of the gospel? Now, back in session 4, we talked about knowing God's story, as in knowing how to articulate and clearly explain the gospel. And we also talked about sharing your own story, how you explain the gospel through how God worked in your own life to bring you to trust in Him. Now, I hope you've actually taken the time, because it is really, really important, to think about how can I clearly articulate the gospel, both as a general gospel presentation, but also through my own life, in a way that is clear, easy to understand, but it also presents a compelling case for the wonderful Saviour that we have in Jesus Christ. But then the question remains, how do I turn a conversation even towards that direction? And it's not so simple as a case of saying, my favourite football team is the Saints. Do you want to know how to become a saint? That would be awkward, it's cheesy, it's not going to make a natural transition to talk about things of Jesus. Unfortunately, there's not a single one thing fits all. People would love a magical transitional phrase you could whip in at any time to smoothly and clearly bring it into Jesus, but that doesn't exist. Now, some people are really, really gifted at turning a conversation from the mundane to the deeply spiritual. Rebecca Manley created a resource for relational evangelism called called Empowered. And in session 5, she talks about turning conversations from the everyday to the spiritual, or what she calls cultivating a curiosity. Now, you may not have that resource, but there's a quick 5-minute clip that's up on YouTube on the Good Book Company's channel, where it's a discussion between Tim Keller and Rebecca Manley about turning conversations to Jesus and to the gospel. But the main things which he talks about and identifies is this, is finding someone's key personal passions, and then from that, asking some general interest questions, then narrowing down to some more specific questions about their area of interest, then to ask a question about an ethical issue within the bounds of their area of interest, and then lead to a God question. The example she uses on that particular video on YouTube is of a doctor. You might start by an introductory question of what led you to decide that you wanted to become a doctor? And then to go a bit more detailed, what are some of the things that you find rewarding as being a doctor? And then to go to that sort of issue question, that ethical question of how do you provide hope to people when they are dying? And it's a natural question of their area of interest already, and that creates a natural question too. So what do you think there could be something beyond this life? Do you think there is a hope beyond death? No, there are ways in which you can have a particular conversation. There's not a set of questions that will work in every single occasion. Some people will be more gifted at doing this than others, but it's something that's worthwhile thinking about the people which you're engaging, their area of interest. How could I bring a conversation from a basic question about their key levels of interest to turn it to an issue question and lead that towards a God question? But that being said, some of us are never going to feel confident to do that. Some of us might wish that someone would ask us an outright question, how can I know Jesus, or how can I be saved? But rarely does that happen. But if you feel like you're never going to be that person who's got the conversational skills to turn a conversation by asking the right questions, there are other ways to approach it as well. John Piper has a method where he goes about it like this, where he says, now, I really want to get to know you more. How about someday we catch up, have a coffee together. I want to hear more about you, your passions, the things that make you tick. And I want to tell you a bit about who I am, my passions, the things that make me tick. Therefore, you've set a clear agenda that both of you are going to share about the things that you're passionate about and the things that you're valuable to, that orient the way and part of shaping of who you are, and that allows an opportunity for you to share the story of God's story, or the story of your own story of how God has called you into a relationship with Jesus Christ. I know some of us still might get scared that we're not going to get it right. Now, stop thinking so much about your ability to communicate. Remember, God has promised His presence with us. His Spirit lives within us. It's the same Spirit that rose Jesus Christ from the dead. But I also want to put forward to you that our engaging with other people is not dependent upon our ability to explain things. There is another means which God has given us, and that is His very word. God's word is given, we're told in 2 Timothy 3:14, and is able to make us wise to salvation. In our next session, we look at part 2 at the how-to of disciple making. We're going to look how to use reading the Bible one-to-one with someone to let the Word of God itself do the heavy lifting for God to reveal Himself to that person through His Word, which is given for that very purpose. So that's the end of our first half of the how-to of disciple making, where we looked at identifying your mission field, engaging with people, building relationships, bringing Jesus and the gospel into those relationships. And next week, next session, we'll deal and build up on that in more detail. Shortly, we're about to have a time of prayer. Still remember to pray for one another, either that God would place people on your heart to be sharing your life with, or to pray for the people by name who God already has placed on your heart. And do remember to share stories. Share stories of how God has worked through you as you've engaged with different people, so you can encourage the people in your group, because nothing encourages a group more than everyday people being used by God and being encouraged to see how He's worked through you. I've got 2 final questions that are coming up on your screen so you can discuss and pray for one another, and I'll see you back at part 2 in our next session.